evening and welcome back. Now, as Kenya approaches the final stretch of Vision 2030, the country's long-term development blueprint is under fresh scrutiny now. While it has delivered landmark investments in infrastructure, technology and public services, questions remain over unmet targets on job creation, industrialization, inequality and the rising cost of living. Now, President William Ruto is championing Vision 2060, a new roadmap aimed at shaping Kenya's development for the next generation. But what lessons should be drawn from Vision 2030? What worked, what didn't, and how can Vision 2060 avoid the pitfalls of the past? Joining us tonight is Nathaniel Mung'are, Director Communications UDA. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
We have James Nyoro, former Kiambu Governor. Karibu sana. And Buka Omole, who is the General Secretary, Communist Party, Marxist Kenya. And here together we will be examining the legacy of Vision 2030 and whether Vision 2060 can deliver a more inclusive, sustainable and prosperous future for all Kenyans. Gentlemen, as we talk about Vision 2060, we have to piggyback on where we are, especially with regards to Vision 2030 and what we must learn from that. Governor, what would you say has been the performance of Kenya in implementing Vision 2030 thus far?
Thank you very much for inviting us. I think from where I sit, I am very happy because I was involved in the formulation of Vision 2030. And when I look at some of the reasons that led to the formulation of Vision 2030, they were very clear, just like they are clear today, that we needed a North Star. We needed a target on which every subsequent governments would always weigh themselves. Prior to that, there were strategies such as Poverty Reduction Strategy Paper 2001, which then was transformed into the Strategy for Wealth and Employment Creation by Kibaki. And what was happening was that there was no North Star. There was nothing to add up to. And therefore, the thinking then of the NAC government was that let's have a long-term vision so that subsequent governments would be taking a piece of that long-term vision. And then by 2030, we would be what the aspirations were, newly industrialized country with high level of living standard and so on and so forth. So with that perspective, if you look at Vision 2030, and I really want to be very clear because people confuse flagship projects with Vision 2030. A vision is a horizon. You don't see it. Okay? It is where the sky touches the ground. And whenever you approach it, you see it touching again. A vision, you never see it. A vision is, so these flagship projects, such as the ones that we've been talking about, which are great, the SGR, I mean, we anticipated that we reduce transport costs from Mombasa to Nairobi to Maraba and wherever. Aspects to do with LabSet, aspects to do with ICT, all of those great projects. As we see in Nairobi, you remember, those of us who are older, that vehicles going to Kampala were passing through the city center. Because of the vision that came in and developed those pillars, we started seeing the bypasses, the southern bypass, the northern bypass. So in real aspect, the hardware part of Vision 2030 is achieved. Not entirely, because I say a vision, you can never achieve it.
You can never achieve it.
But the software part is where we may want to look at.
Yeah. I want to come to you, Nathaniel. Now, when you talk about our Vision 2030, perhaps, then we need to go to its onset because Vision 2030, actually, it was signed off by retired and former president, the late Daniel Moi. By the time we're getting to 2002, then Mwai Kibaki picks up, and Vision 2030 was never really, we never saw a lot come in until 2008, when then it was relaunched by President Kibaki. Then the CCOM lands into Kenya, fiber optic then becomes a reality, and Kenya is positioned as one of the countries that becomes a technological hub. But we get to then 2013, the government of Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto and many have argued that little has been done during that period. What do you reckon are some of the lessons to learn, even as the government, UDA, wants to come up with Vision 2060?
So thank you, Dennis, for having me. First of all, before I go to your question, we must go to the foundation. And I want to totally agree with Governor Nyoro on what he has said. If you go back to the foundation of the country in 1963, I will categorize our development journey into 3 periods. There is the period from 1963 to 2007. Then there's a period of 2008 now to 2030. Then what the president is currently proposing to be beyond Vision 2030. So these 3 periods are very critical to contextualize the question that you've asked. Now, if you go to 1963, when Kenya started, our founding fathers were championing for 3 main key things. 1, kumaliza ugonjwa, umaskini, na ujinga. These are the foundation of this country. Now, the question is, have we achieved what the forefathers dreamed about? Now, if fast forward to 2010 when we inaugurated a new constitution, there were certain fundamental human rights that have been enshrined in the preamble of the constitution, Article 10 of the National Values and Principles of Governance, and even Article 43 on economic and social rights. These things are twins. They work together. They are not in competition. So if you go to what you rightly asked, what lessons do we need to learn from Vision 2030? Now, Vision 2030 had 3 key pillars. That is the socio-economic and political pillar. On the economic side, Vision 2030 aspired to have Kenya as a lower middle income earning country. The question is, have we achieved that status? Then, in that aspiration, we said Kenya must grow at an annual rate of at least 7%. That was the aspiration and the target we put on ourselves. So, in achieving some of this, for example, the economic pillar, there are certain enablers that have to be put in place to make sure that we achieve that 7% annual rate. During the period of Kibaki, we got at its peak before the post-election violence took us back in terms of realizing the economic pillar. Then come fast forward during the Uhuru period, there was a high debt accumulation, which took our debt to 10 trillion. So the fiscal space was not there to continue developing the country. So by the time the UDA government came in place, the fiscal space has been very tight for us. So we have been forced to explore alternative and innovative financing mechanism to finance our vision. So these are some of the issues. Right. The second part that I need to mention here critically is the issue of the political pillar. Have we attained what we call a competitive democratic space? The answer is yes. We have truly achieved a democratic country where people have the rights to say what they want, and there is a peaceful transfer of power from one administration to the other. So there are things that we have achieved, and there are things that we have not achieved that we need to achieve in the new discussion that we are having.
Let me go to Buka. Buka, in terms of all the pillars that were there, which are economic, social, and political pillars, which then were what was supposed to be used to implement the Vision 2030, how would you reckon we've performed on that, especially on the political pillar where Nathaniel says that we've achieved that, where Kenyans have the right to speak whatever it is they have to speak, yet we've seen when you speak, you get picked up, you get disappeared?
First of all, maybe if I respond to Mugari, Mugari is doing a PR exercise because for UDA is the country of the government. But you cannot talk of democratic space. That's a big joke. When people are being abducted, people are being killed. This is not, it's democratic in whose interest? This is what we need to talk about. In fact, if we say here that there's peaceful transfer of power, it's just because the rich has not died. But every year since 1997, 2007 was the peak of violence, which peaceful transfer of power when the poor people keep dying every election. And I dare these UAD people to tell us, next year, after the elections, there will be more burials of the poor people.
Why would you say that, Buka? Because we have to be careful on what it is we say. And what evidence,
we have seen,
at the end of the day,
you have highlighted in this TV program here, state-sponsored militia going after opposition leaders. What are they going to do? We have a national police service. Why are the police escorting people to cause violence? It is only in the interest of the ruling government that such things can happen. But let me go to the Vision 2030 and Vision 2060, because it is important for us. You know, when you talk about development, it is development in whose interests? This is important for us, because you can talk about development because, you know, when you come from the airport, you see big buildings. But there are people who build those buildings but stay homeless. In fact, since Vision 2030, Dennis, please know that 70.5% of the Kenyan people still stay in the backwardness of rural areas, still eating life with a djembe. But we are here talking about development because even though Nairobi is the center of finance capital, but Nairobi, the majority of the people in Nairobi still ate life in poverty. 72% of the Kenyan population in Nairobi still live in slum areas. Which development are we talking about? If you talk about the Vision 2030, even though they are saying the horizon cannot be seen, but if you do the audit of Vision 2030, the flagship projects were mainly under the PPP, the private partnership projects. Who benefited? The big money was made by finance capital. The big money was made by businessmen. But the real issues that President William Samoei Ruto stood on TV and talked about still remain the same since 1963. One of the issues that are remaining the same, are Kenyans still living in informal settlement in slum areas without access to social facilities?
I want us to go and listen into what former president retired. Wait.
In the Vision 2030 and the so-called Vision 2060, that without fundamental changes in the structure of the Kenyan economy, the Vision 2030 failed, and Vision 2060 will surely fail.
I want us to listen to what retired president, the late Mwai Kibaki, said during the launch of that project, so that we can just piggyback on that and look at whether we've managed to achieve this thing. So let's play that.
The vision, therefore, singles out 3 pillars on which we realize our goal. The first pillar is to ensure that we achieve and sustain an average economic growth of over 10% per annum over the next 25 years. The second pillar seeks to build a just and cohesive society with equitable social development and a clean and secure environment. The third pillar aims at producing a democratic political system that nurtures issue-based politics, the rule of law, and protects all the rights and freedoms of every individual and society.
Let me pick it up from there.
Those are the words, wait, Booker.
Yeah.
The words of retired president, the late Mwai Kibaki, as it mentioned about the 3 pillars, economic pillar. I just want us to go on the economic front as well. It's just mentioned that the country ought to have moved on 10%, right?
Dennis,
as we speak today,
Booker,
we'll have the conversation, eh? We'll have the conversation. So as we talk about the 10% economic growth, there was a time when we achieved that, and that was before the 2007-2008 post-election violence. After that, Kenya has not really managed to get beyond the double-digit economic growth. What would you reckon, Governor, are some of the reasons as to why Kenya has not managed to achieve that pillar and the promise of economic growth at 10%, yet we achieved that before?
Kenya has achieved an economic growth, GDP growth of 7%, shortly before the launch of the Vision 2030. I think we need to be very clear there. And let me correct that Moi was not involved in the formulation of Vision 2030. That was an aspect that was brought in by Kibaki. A growth of 7%. If you look at the 5 years of the NAC government, the kind of economic growth that we realized, including macroeconomic, including poverty reduction, including financial inclusion, people are being called by banks to go and get money from the banks. Poverty started to reduce. I remember poverty reduced from 56% to 46%. Immediately after the vision, and that was the basis on which the vision was formulated. Immediately after the vision, yes, there were some drawbacks that came in, the tribal clashes, the world economic, financial, whatever, but we have dropped down to 4.6, 4.3, 4 point whatever percent of GDP growth, mainly because of the two other pillars that we are talking about. You can talk about external factors, but let us look at the political pillar. We have been a very, very undemocratic society. Immediately Kibaki left, whatever came in, the environment was not conducive to start propelling, including investor confidence. When you look at whose growth is it, which is a social pillar, do we see health improving? Do we see education improving? Do we see all of those aspects that touches on health, they were not improving. Therefore, the facilitators of economic growth were not there as compared to when we were experiencing 7% of economic growth. And therefore, and I want to say one more thing, growth for what? Even when you say that the growth is 5%, what are drivers of that 5%? If agriculture is not growing, if manufacturing is not growing, if it is only financial inclusion, if it is ICT or services, that is not where the jobs are. That is not where the poor people are. So we have an economy that has not been growing, and even when it is growing, it is not growing with the people. That's why people are saying, you tell us 5% GDP growth, okay, not 10, 5%, but we can't feed it. Yes, because manufacturing is not working, agriculture is not working, social sectors are not working.
Nathaniel, when we talk about Vision 2030, we talk about Vision 2030 and anyone would just think of Mwai Kibaki because he came with it, and the country, 10% growth, post-election happens, and that again is another dent on Kibaki's legacy as well, on the political pillar as well, under that as well. But that notwithstanding, anything after Mwai Kibaki's government has been Kenyans complaining, Vision 2030 disappearing every other new day. So what would you reckon has been the reason or the problem as to why Kenya has been unable to go back on the upwards trajectory towards implementation of Vision 2030 as envisioned in 2008?
So Dennis, let me mention something very clearly. President Ruto came in power when we were at the phase of the fourth medium-term plan of the Vision 2030. So under this phase, you must reckon that he also went to the people just before the national general election, did 47 county economic forums to get views from the Kenyan people on what will constitute his election manifesto. Now, these views consolidated into what we call the better plan, the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. So he has had to align the better plan with the Vision 2030, especially in this, the fourth medium-term plan.
You said it's yet to align?
So from the beginning, he had to align it. Now, I want to mention something very clear that the governor said here. You, as a leader, or any leader in any country, can never lead a country if the people are hungry. You have to find a way of feeding the nation. So agriculture has to work. So what have we done in terms of making sure we feed the nation? We've had to implement what we call the minimum guaranteed returns and subsidize the farmer, subsidize production. That's why you have seen the price of 50 kg bag of fertilizer has come down to 2,500 per 50 kg. That's what you have seen in terms of sectors in the agriculture. For example, the price of 1 liter of milk has gone up to as high as 50 shillings per liter, up from what we usually to be around 30 or 25 shillings. Now, if you go to the sugar belt, for example, in Western Kenya, the farmers were not enjoying the state intervention in terms of reviving the state-owned sugar factories, that is Nzoia, Sony, and Chemelil. Now, government has leased those factories to the private sector, and you've seen the cane farmers are very happy because right now, the cane farmers are paid between 7 to 10 days. the cane is picked from the farm. Allow me to finish, because if you don't give me space to answer, and you're rushing me,
I'm not rushing. I have to interject where we need facts.
So let
I have to interject, rightfully
correct.
so, respectfully so.
Correct.
Because when you talk about sugar belt, farmers are now happy, and state-owned resources have been given to private owners. One asks the question, what is the responsibility of the state in making sure that its resources for Mwananchi get to perform at the best level possible?
Correct. So speaking about the state-owned sugar factories, Sony, Chemili, Nzoia, these three ones.
I'm a sugar farmer, by the way.
Yeah, correct. Now, before we implemented the reforms that we have done, the farmers were being paid up to, sometimes they could wait up to a month. Right now, the cane farmers are paid between 7 to 10 days. For the first time in the history of Kenya, the cane farmers have a sugar bonus. It never used to be there. So tell Buka to relax. The cane farmers. Please hold him to.
We'll get to you, Buka.
You cannot invite hecklers to the studio. Now, when you have these reforms that we have done, that we are picking the cane from the farm, we have implemented the turnaround time of paying the farmers, and we are actually introduced the sugar bonus. And in partnership with the private sector, we have to list, because these sugarcane factories were reeling in high debt. Now, let's go to the coffee farmers. Mostly if you go to Kirinyaga County, which is the county that is producing the largest coffee in terms of the coffee, the price has gone up to 160 per kg of the coffee.
All right.
Now, this price is giving the highest return because we implemented a coffee reform of saying you must have one license in the value chain. You cannot be an auctioneer, a farmer, and you cannot have the, let me finish this point. Now, these reforms we've done in the agriculture sector is to be able to support the farmer in terms of production. If you come to maize, for example, because which is the most consumed part of the agricultural value chain, we've increased production from 2003, from 44 million bags to last year, what we had 75 million bags of maize. Right. That's what you have seen. The price of 2 kg of unga has gone down. Why? We know that we can never lead a country that is hungry. You have to feed the nation.
All right. I come to
this
you,
is a critical part of what we call the forefathers said in the beginning, kumaliza njaa.
All right. I come to you, Buka. When you look at development as a fact now under Vision 2030, right? We've not gotten even to 2060 under Vision 2030. There are lapses that do exist, where today we would talk about the fourth medium-term plan that was there, and there are incentives that are given to farmers, rightfully so. Give credit where it's due. Farmers got the subsidized fertilizer. But many as well are asking the question, under the social aspect of it all, if the price of unga has gone down, but I'm still unable to afford that because of other factors, say taxation, how does that then fit into the social pillar of Vision 2030? And are we being honest in terms of what the vision has done to Mwananchi?
First of all, there are a few things that needs to be rebutted, but I will do so. But in our own clear analysis, the crisis in this country that has prevented this country from developing since 1963, especially, there is no country in the world that has developed without industries. There is no country in the world that has developed with a djembe. When you're talking about agriculture, forget about this lie that people are talking about subsidy. You cannot subsidize production when you're actually taking subsidy from fuel. This is the lie that Jubilee, not Jubilee, Yehuda has been selling us since the time immemorial. It is rhetoric that when you want to subsidize production, you mechanize agriculture, produce surplus, then do value addition. Then it will bring the need for the high-level industrialization to develop industries. If it is true that we are in this good as a country like this, why don't Nathaniel tell us, why is Nairobi industrial area turning into a warehouse of cheap imported products? There's no development taking place in this country. In fact, it is underdevelopment. So we have to talk about the Vision 2030 failure, that this country does not lack planning. The Kenyan economy is turned upside down. Remember, even these subsidies, how is it possible that a coffee farmer, for example, does not have a stake on the price of coffee, but the auctioneers at the coffee auction has the capability. So even though there are some hecklers in the show, has Nathaniel rightly put it, but he cannot lie to the Kenyans for a fact that you have subsidized production, while we have not seen processing of tea, processing of coffee, processing of raw materials here. All the Kenyan production takes place is primary production. In fact, Kenya is an extractive economy where raw materials are exported abroad to provide quality jobs for the imperialist countries. So when I understand they're talking about the Hustler Fund. The Hustler Fund was meant to empower people to sell groundnuts here and to change the people's lives. People are meant to borrow as low as 100 shillings to make sure that they can thrive in business. In short, the Jubilee administration at that time, followed by the Kibaki's administration, who pretended to be the national economy, and then President William Samoei Ruto came up with the Hustler Fund, which they are calling the bottom-up approach. But the bottom-up approach is not to oversee a neoliberal economy of free enterprising, where you are telling people to start businesses through miniature capital. Any business, in fact, this is for a fact, SME business, small and medium enterprises in this country, their failure rate is 80%. Why is that so? Because they are undercapitalized. The government is highly over. In fact, look at the budget. Who was given in the budget what the so-called subsidies? Were they not the multinationals in EPZ? The capital gain tax was reduced. Now that you're talking about the bottom-up economic model, what about Ruto's rhetoric of expanding the tax base while at the same time helping development? When you expand the tax base, you tax the poor of the poorest because they are majority. It's not necessarily that where the people are is where the money is, because the big people who trade at the Nairobi Stock Exchange are not very many, they are few. Yep. The big business people. So what we are trying to say is that the cure of this country, from a correct perspective of the Communist Party, is that we must change structurally on how we govern this country and start the correct way to develop the economy. Forget about this Singapore rhetoric. The thing is, what are the fundamentals of Kenyan economy? First of all, the last thing is this. Yeah. We must rescue land. This is the thing. You cannot produce without land. Look at in fact, I dare the Audit administration to release the TGRC report and the Ndumu land report in its fullness to know who owns land in this country and then auctions that land for finance capital but does not produce it.
I want us to proceed to look at now Vision 2060 as launched by President William Ruto, as rather addressed by President William Ruto. And let's just listen in to his vision through that Vision 2060. Let's listen in.
Our Constitution places public participation at the very heart of governance. It is therefore not merely my desire, but my constitutional duty to ensure that the national vision, which succeeds Vision 2030, is shaped through an inclusive, transparent, people-driven, and genuinely national process. Accordingly, on Wednesday, the 12th of August, 2026, we shall formally launch a national conversation on Kenya's future beyond Vision 2030.
Even as we talk about Kenya beyond Vision 2030, Governor, any country that considers itself a developed nation has become developed due to industrialization. There is no country in this world that is developed without industrialization that has offered job opportunities, taxes to government for it to be able to grow. And any country as well that talks about becoming developed has to produce a product that is selling outside for profit and also get excesses that then it's able to move forward. We live in a country where almost 80+% of what we consume in the country is imported, including our very own coffee, our very own tea. We import them back. As we talk about Vision 2060 today, what should the conversation rather be moving forward, especially on that pillar of industrialization? Because there is no way we're getting to developed nations without industrialization being given the priority it deserves, without political, social stability in the country.
Well, great question, great question. You know, sometimes you imagine that some of us just sit there and we describe the part of the elephant that we are touching as the elephant. When you talk about the things that my friend Nathaniel is talking about, which are not doubtful, fertilizer subsidy has been there, and and all the coffee prices and all of that, to me is describing the part of the elephant that you are touching. But you are not describing the elephant. What you need in other economies, which the president has actually been enumerating, is agricultural transformation. So what you do is you look at the food sector and see what you do to the food sector so that you can bring down the price of food, as a result of which there is going to be some savings of disposable income that will go towards buying some other manufactured goods in the market. In other words, you are not just looking, describing the part of the elephant that there is subsidy. You are describing the elephant itself. And as if that is not enough. And it is important for data to tell us some of the things that Nathaniel is talking about. And I'm not doubting it, but data tell us. Coffee prices, it was not because of the reforms that you did. In fact, just Google now, and you know that the coffee prices went up above almost to the ceiling because of the drought that affected Brazil and Vietnam. So the supply in the world market reduced, okay? The demand was high, and the price went up. Yes, there is some element of internal reforms that came in, but I can tell you for sure, 75–80% of the price that you are talking about is contributed by external factors. That's what I would call describing the part of the elephant that you are touching. Now, if everything has been working, why has manufacturing stagnated at 7%? The anticipation was that it would move to 15%. It has stagnated at 7%, a very, very insignificant proportion. In fact, somebody said, the irony is that the roads that we have put in the southern bypass, the northern bypass, the expressway, is actually to facilitate imports to arrive at our market cheaper, rather than our exports, getting to Mombasa, okay? They don't meet anywhere. It's just the imports that are coming. Why? The cost of production in this country is extremely high for manufactured goods. 2, the cost of power. And these statistics are there. Power in Ethiopia is 5 cents per kilowatt hour. It is 7 cents per kilowatt hour in South Africa. It is 6 cents per kilowatt hour in Egypt. It is between 11 and 15% per kilowatt hour in Kenya, and it is irregular. So the cost of manufacturing, the tendency to allow people to make money by importing things instead of producing here. So the irony is that you can say we have done these things in agriculture, but manufacturing is stagnating. You can get your GDP of 5% driven by services because banks are making money, and ICT, this technology is making money, but there are no people going for jobs. There are no people going to farms. That's really the bottom line. Therefore, if we are going to think about changing this, we have to look at the hits and the misses of Vision 2030 and say it can never be business as usual. We have to change the template of our economic development so that it can reach that particular person down there.
Nathaniel, when you talk about development, many have described development not just brick and mortar. Development has to be wholesome. Correct. So development in the sense that when you invest on that child going to school, that is development. When you invest in healthcare, that more Kenyans are healthy, that is development. When you invest in Kenyans having to access food at affordable prices, that they are getting fortified foods, that they are no longer getting sick or cholera is not in their system, that is development. It is wholesome. It is not just brick and mortar.
Correct.
Now, it has been stated that we've done brick and mortar. We've built roads, we've built SGR. But what are we doing using all these other pillars of infrastructure and Vision 2030 for us to say we are ferrying X amount of product from Kenya outside? Because SGR, as we know it, is during the holidays ferrying people away. Yet that is not the sole purpose of SGR. SGR is supposed to ferry goods in and outside the country. As we talk about brick and mortar, even under Vision 2060, how do we bridge that gap so that it makes sense economically that we are investing for the betterment of the people of Kenya and not to ferry in imports?
Correct. Dennis, I hope you'll give me an extra minute or two because I have to rebuttal the two of them and also answer your long question.
Yes, go.
So first of all, what you describe is in Article 43 of the Constitution, economic and social rights. The right to a good housing, the right to the highest attainable standard of healthcare, the right to be free from hunger, education, and social welfare. Now, the state has to show compassion in terms of intervening to make sure that these rights are attained. It cannot be left to anybody else. That's why you see he has a party called Communist Party. He calls it what Frantz Fanon describes the wretched of the earth. In UDA, we call it the hustler, the people at the bottom of the economic pyramid. By the way, you should join UDA because that's where the true manifesto of the Communist Party are. Now,
that's not, excuse me.
Now,
the rest of the earth and the hustler are not the same thing.
Because when I'm rattling him, he was rattling me, but I was keeping quiet.
Dennis, please, respectfully.
So,
respectfully, because you already called me the heckler.
In 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But respectfully, let us not confuse the terms. The rest of the earth means those that are being exploited by the current elite led by President William Samoei Ruto. But the hustler is a rhetoric for order, to deceive young unemployed people to serve the Ruto deception government.
You'll give me the time that he has taken away from me. Now, while the state is showing compassion and intervening to make sure that Article 43 of the Constitution is implemented, we have to make certain things very clear in terms of that intervention. So the president is talking about in the Vision 2060, for example, Kenyans are tired of excessive borrowing. And Kenyans are tired of additional taxation. So what have we done? We are introducing what we call innovative financing mechanisms of financing our development in terms of the Vision 2060. So the first thing we have done, we have introduced two funds. We have introduced the National Infrastructure Fund, and we have introduced the Sovereign Wealth Fund. These two funds are going to make sure that we achieve what we have put out in terms of the Vision 2060. So let me speak to some of the aspects that Governor Nyoro was talking about. Let's come to infrastructure as one of the enablers. How come that for the last 60 years, we've not been having 22,000 kilometers of tarmac? It is only now, under UDA government and the President William Ruto, we have rolled out 6,000 new kilometers of tarmac across the country. And we have distributed those kilometers equally. In the past, these 22,000 have always been skewed into one region. Half of them was in one region. There was no inclusivity in the way these roads were being distributed. In some places of this country, you could only meet a road on the highway. But there are places in this country, you meet a road and goats and cows are sleeping on those tarmac roads. Now, we have said, in the next 7 years, using the National Infrastructure Fund, we are going to construct 28,000 new kilometers of tarmac. This is very key because infrastructure is an enabler. There is a point that Governor Nyoro talked about, energy, and he's rightly put it so. In terms of the kilowatts that we are setting, the cost of electricity is too high. So in the new vision, we have said we are going to generate 10,000 new megawatts of energy through solar, wind, and hydro. So that investment from the National Infrastructure Fund is going here. Now, the other thing we are keen about is that under irrigation, through the National Infrastructure Fund, we are going to put 1.5 million acres of land under irrigation so that we are able to feed the country more. These are the key issues that we are talking about. You've seen recently the president has actually inaugurated the new JKI airport. It cannot be that Kenya is a hub in East Africa, and we're the largest economy in Eastern Central Africa, but we don't have a modern airport. So through the National Infrastructure Fund, let me explain that. Through the National Infrastructure Fund, we want to increase the arrivals of the people coming to the country and boost the numbers in tourism by having a modern airport. So we've taken the proceeds from the National Infrastructure Fund and we have crowded in the private sector. And just to explain to you what the National Infrastructure Fund is, we are taking off the pressure from the taxpayer by creating what we call a special purpose vehicle. The NIF will put in some money. We crowd in the additional fund from the private sector, times 10 of what we put in from the National Infrastructure Fund, and we build this key infrastructure.
Right.
Now, in essence, what Dennis we are saying, in essence, is that there are certain enablers to attaining the Vision 2060 that can only be done through innovative financing mechanism. That's why you saw the government has divested shares in some of the public assets, some of the premium assets, as a way of democratizing wealth, putting them in the stock market, raising money, which we've put into the National Infrastructure Fund, and we're using those monies to be able to do some of these mega infrastructure development projects. Now, finally, let me say something that Governor mentioned here about export, and actually you've asked the question. The only way you can be able to generate even jobs in the economy, that is one of the pillars, the aspiration of Vision 2030, is to be able to export. Now, we have come up with what we call Made in Kenya, and the Kenya Investment Authority is actually attracting a lot of these investments, then we export. You cannot export when locally we have a deficit in a number of things. For example, we have a deficit in sugar. Now, since we did the reforms that we have done in the sugar sector, the import of sugar has reduced by 70%. Until we are able to cover in the deficit in what we have in the foods, the food market, we will not be able to export. What we can only do,
let him finish.
Allow me to finish. What we can only do in the moment is to work on the deficits, but at the same time, show compassion in fulfilling Article 43. One of the key issues that is there in Article 43, let me just finalize this thought, Dennis, because you need to give me extra time, is the issue of housing that has been there. The housing agenda for us is both a job program and also giving people dignity, which is in Article 43 of the Constitution. So we have 7 million Kenyans who are living in slums. So what we need to do, we need to create a program by the state, the affordable housing program, to give these people dignity who don't have toilets in their houses, who don't have a good environment for the children to study, by creating a dignified way through this affordable housing program.
All right. I come to you, Buka. Buka.
Yes.
We talk about industrialization in Kenya. But if you look at industrialization, especially in the sugar sector, research and data shows that sugar is actually a byproduct of that process. Sugar across the world is used to generate power. If we managed our sugar industry, state-owned sugar industry, the 10,000 megawatts that you're talking about today would be achieved if we only managed our sugar industries well. But that notwithstanding as well, there is the issue of 1.5 million hectares of land to be put under irrigation. A good thing, good idea, right? But one asks the question, Galana Kulalu, a project that has been there, what is there to show? Because at the end of the day, we have to look at projects that have been there, the implementation. And many have said, Kenya does not lack vision. Kenya does not lack individuals to implement that. Our problem is when bureaucracy enters into the implementation of these projects that leaves us lagging behind.
Yeah. You know, Dennis, in Kenya, in fact, to be bold with you, Kenya needs a national democratic revolution. In essence, the managers of the Kenyan assets are appointees of foreign interests. So they cannot manage Kenya in the interest of Kenya. That is why next year we are going for an election. You will see all of them crowding in London, in Washington. What are they going to do? To ask for alms. And that is why if you see at the Vision 2030, the Vision 2060, who adopts it, who finances it, and into whose interest? Now, Let me also comment about, because when President William Samoei Ruto came on TV and was discussing about, and this was the basis in which we came into the second round, which President William Samoei Ruto was on a clear PR exercise. He talks about public participation to include people in the development project. Last year, we had a social explosion in the street about the finance bill. It was a misnomer on the government side on public participation, where the president failed to listen to young people raising their concerns. He ended up putting bullets on them. At the very end of it, he removed the finance bill with the dead bodies. That is what he called public participation. Now there's a public participation going in Sakwa about the nuclear. 1 dead, 17 young people are being charged on terrorism. Police are terrorizing people in Sakwa as we speak here every night. So president should shut up about issues of public participation when he cannot offer people to contribute genuinely and to speak their mind. So when we say that Kenya needs a national democratic revolution, people are talking about, there is clear digits that President William Samoei Ruto has attacked the very heart of the Kenyan development, especially on the education of this country. I will not be speaking with you here, Dennis, because I was in Syria. Maybe the only reason that I am speaking here because education is the equalizer. What did the UDA government do? They have now introduced a new funding model for education, and majority of the admission in the higher education system are mainly a preservation for the privileged people. So what we are talking about generally in this show is that whatever programs that are being rolled out by this government, who benefits them? Somebody talks about housing. We know that government-driven housing is to remove the slum dwellers out, then they build the house, and then the brokers and the most influential people take it. That is what happened to high-rise. In Yala, where I come from, there is what they are calling affordable housing project there that is meant to offer employment, that is meant to give people a good accommodation. Now, the housing projects there in Yala probably will range from maybe 900,000 to the minimum. Even the people who control the economy in Yala, which are mainly teachers and government employees, cannot afford those houses. So when we talk about the national democratic revolution, what we are talking about is that we want Kenyans for Kenyans. And we want the development project, first of all, to liberate land. Nobody wants to talk about land in this country. If you don't, one of the primary factors of production that have not been liberated in this country is the total rampant land theft that has taken place since 1963. I do not want to say, there is a lot to say about President William Samoei Ruto and his relationship with land, which is already in the public domain. But if you have the fundamentals of primary development, you are talking about you want to mechanize agriculture. But how do you mechanize agriculture when the entire majority of the Kenyan land is still under what we call private development? And what Nathaniel wants to lie to the Kenyans about is that if you private a company, then the company becomes profitable to help the people, as if government is a witch that takes off money. The issue around the state-owned enterprises is rampant corruption and theft that takes place. Let us say how much you're telling me about sugar factories and how they need to fire the power sector in this country. One of the regeneration power projects was started in Mumias Sugar. At that time, Mumias Sugar was thriving, you remember, and there was ethanol production taking place. But when you put power production in Mumias under what you call an independent power producer, and then you picked a fixed price, that means the Kenya Power now, but Kenya Power and Lightning then, only have to pay the independent power producer a standard price, whether you use it or not. In fact, the independent power producers from Kipevu 1 to Kipevu 3, we pay all the overheads, whether we use that power or not, and it is reflected in your power bill. So in essence, what we are saying that when you talk about the national democratic revolution, and this whole, in fact, this is only for Kenyans to know, because the sovereign fund, how do you start even your house? You must have a surplus to save. Even when Moi came with that campaign of Kula Tano, Weka Tano, nobody kept Tano because they already were even. So the sovereign fund will not work because Kenya is in deficit. The national economy is not producing much. The Kenya is burdened by debt, and there is no way Kenya is a sovereign country.
We are running out of time.
Yes,
One question. With the implementation of Vision 2060, right? 2030 as well has been there. And we want to go really fast because time is not on our side. One asks the question, can we achieve Vision 2030 with huge debt and corruption scandals that continue to wreck this country? Is it possible?
Well, I would say that the situation today is worse than it was in 2008, as we are talking about. The kind of things that, conditions that are supposed to propel us to economic growth that leads to better social growth are really not there. And I have to say, right from the beginning, that I think the discussion about Vision 2060 is misplaced right now. If you look at Vision 2030, it was formed on the first year of the new government, of the Rainbow Coalition government. It was bipartisan. Everybody was on board. You remember that was when Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga was brought into government. Everybody was pulling in the same direction. Now, the thinking right now about 2060, this is the last year of the government. It may not be the final year, but the last year.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's not bipartisan. People are pulling from different directions. And when we talk about the infrastructure development that Nathaniel is talking about and all these nice things, the question really is, where is the disconnect with the people? Why are people not appreciating a road that passes through their place? It is because the internal problems they are suffering from. They cannot afford that unga. They cannot relate to the road. And until we get to that point where we as a country sit together, not on the last year of a government, not in a divided environment that we are in, we have to be a bipartisan society, then I don't see us talking about 2063.
Nathaniel, real quick, Vision 2060, corruption is a problem. You talk about cost of living as well is high, and the debt question continues to be there. How do we achieve it? And do Kenyans think that this is a priority to them at the moment?
So, Dennis, let me tell you something. In 1965, somebody sat in cabinet and passed a session of paper number 10 that said that there are areas in Kenya that have high potential and there should be government investment. And there are areas that have low potential, there should be no government investment.
Yes.
That historical marginalization has contributed cumulatively to the problems that we are discussing here today. Now, some of the things that we have done and we should continue to do, even as we discuss what the president has proposed as the new National Development Charter, is the issue of how do we raise money. And that's why we come up with a contribution model in NSSF to save. Today, through NSSF, we have saved 370 billion in 2 years, an amount that we saved in 60 years for about 320 billion. So we are using part of these proceeds in the NSSF to do the Rironi-Mau Summit Road. The first section of Rironi to Naivasha, NSSF is investing money together with a private sector player to open up this part of Western Kenya. Now, there are moments, let me continue. Yeah. These are pension funds, so it's allowed. There are moments in this country when people said there are regions, that's why I talked about the session of paper number 10, that the central region deserves a thicker road, but the Western Kenya do not deserve a Rironi-Mau Summit Road. This cannot be the historical marginalization. The Constitution talks about inclusivity. So when we are implementing this program of trying to save money, encourage the culture of saving, and use part of these pension funds to do or unlock development, it is the correct decision. Right. Finally, Dennis, let me just, 30 seconds. Yes. Let me talk about education that we have left in 30 seconds. It is for the first time we have hired the highest number of teachers, 120,000 teachers, and we've allocated the highest number of, the amount, about 780 billion, up from 500 billion in the last 2 years. Why? Right. To invest in our children.
Yet capitation still is a problem. Education funding model is not working. And even when you talk about teachers, many are still outside. And even the pension you talk about doesn't get
But you didn't say those comments
as we talk about in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes.
You know, Dennis, first of all, you must warn Nathaniel about isolationist politics. This idea of talking tribal politics indirectly cannot be entertained in this country. That probably saying that one part of this country does not deserve roads or the other. Tribalism is tribalism, and it's a crime that must be
I talked
defeated
about
in this country.
inclusivity.
So you cannot tell us. We know that President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi was in this country for several years. That did not make the majority of the Kalenjin community have resources than the other countries. In fact, his hometown was the most poor. So this idea of talking about indirect things is to set this country on fire by saying that one place developed, clearly we know is attacking the mountain. All right. Primarily, that is not acceptable.
As a conclusion.
No, I didn't say
Secondly,
that. I didn't
As a
say that.
conclusion.
Secondly is that I say that we need a national democratic revolution to recover the economy. Forget about, you see, I realize that most economics, mainly neoliberal economics, they rely on GDP. GDP is that you take the country's income and divide by the number of people. So even the rich billionaire and you here is being allocated the same amount of money in theory, but in practice, you, as when you see your pay slip, it does not reflect that. So let us be clear that this country, its main problem is that the country is not producing enough, the country is borrowing more, and we don't need any inspiring document from William Samoei Ruto ever again and sweet words. What we need is a structural change of the economy to inspire direct development to touch the millions of people that remain poor.
Gentlemen, that is a good place to end the conversation. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. Unfortunately, time will never be enough. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being here. James Nyoro, former Governor Kiambu County, Nathaniel Amongare, Director Communications with your party, Abuka Omole, who is the General Secretary, Communist Party, Marxist Kenya. And to you for keeping us company, remember that on the 12th, you have an opportunity to go give your views. Public participation will be launched on the 12th of this month. Go, be heard, and also give us suggestions on how Kenya will get to 2060 and even beyond. My name is Dennis Aseto. To the entire team that made this production a success, asante sana, and to you, good night.
The following takes place from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m.